So I think the risks is obviously something that jumps to the forefront of everyone's minds anytime there's new technology on the scene. The risks associated with the use of large language models are going to be very specific to each use case as we begin to develop products. So first and foremost, what is the end consumer for the large language model? Are we building potentially a chatbot that's going to be consumer facing, that potentially has the risk of hallucinating and passing nonsense messages back to a consumer, which would be a terrible customer experience for the business, etc. Where is the LLM going to be hosted? Is that going to be one of the privately owned companies that are progressing really well currently? Is it going to be an open source deployment hosted on the cloud? Is it going to potentially be a very expensive on-site, on-prem deployment of an LLM? All these questions are going to play, and different risks are going to be associated with different use cases.
So I can offer some insights from my perspective, from Nimble's perspective. So if I didn't mention in my introduction, Nimble is a tech consultancy. We help customers or clients to deliver technical products, software products, whether that's that they need BAs or a development team. The danger of a tool or generative AI in general, especially things that generate code and tests and things like that, and especially the accessibility to them, is that we're potentially gonna be using them to build more and more fragile systems, and we're not necessarily gonna know how fragile the systems we've built are until, you know, a legacy system 5 years down the line that's been fed all this poor code and you know what I mean, until it all crumbles down on top of you then. So I know there's a lot of fear around things like losing jobs and whether it's going to make software engineering redundant, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I think ultimately this first stretch could see us kept in jobs purely dealing with the messes that we're making for ourselves now using it. Oops, I just spilled my water.
Yeah, you both panelists have already touched on the main challenges in leveraging generative AI. So obviously it's going to be dependent on the use case. So if you're just trying to brainstorm for organizing a wedding or something, or your child's birthday party, which is the example you see everywhere usually, I mean, that's both a non-risky use case, and even if you get really bad suggestions, it's not catastrophic. I mean, it's unlikely you're gonna plan the whole party just following whatever a chatbot, an LLM chatbot told you, and then you have an unhappy child. But if you leverage technology for a client, or an organization that really depends on a customer-facing chatbot for giving accurate information, reliable information, personalized information, context-specific information, and also messaging that is on brand, as well as interesting, again, personalized, non-repetitive. It's more difficult to just use something off the shelf without tuning it, without incorporating design before you bring in the large language models. So you always need design, and you always need the human in the loop, who is going to be involved either in the design and just thinking, what discovering or designing the service or the application together with you or with the organization, to figure out why you want to use the technology and where and how and when. And then you also need a human in the loop to check the output of the LLM, chatbot, whatever it is. And you also need domain specificity, because, and I guess that is part of the tuning and the design of the service. So you don't want to just use an LLM off the shelf if you want specifically your system to be working, say, in the banking domain. So I've designed chatbots, traditional chatbots for all kinds of verticals, banks, telecoms, whatever. And I've been involved in, or part of my job was to actually create or represent the world of that chatbot in terms of, I guess, what you would call in the Alexa world, intents, or semantic labels that show the entities in a world and the relationships among these entities, in particular in terms of the task that your customer is trying to achieve. And I'm talking about 400 different labels, 500 different labels for each domain. And these are important both in modeling your training data and predicting data that you haven't seen yet. But they're also important because by having those and fleshing or specifying relationships among them, you can decide where to go next. And okay, now with large language models, even people who have been designing chatbots forever have been surprised at how good they are, to say something to follow up a question or a prompt. But it's still too uncontrollable for commercial use case where you absolutely need control and predictability. So, and I've held the microphone too long, but the danger is that something is too generic, too inaccurate, let alone, if it hallucinates and makes up stuff, which would be absolutely catastrophic for an organization, especially if it's a government. Imagine if it's a government department. Then security. Do you want to be sending your data or the customer input to whoever, to whoever built the large language model? And do you want to send it to the US? Do you want it to stay in the EU? Do you want to even leave your servers? In the case of banks, that's really crucial. And then, of course, the proliferation of bad data. If the system has hallucinated data, then that makes part of the training data in the future, which means that you will perpetuate, bias, errors, and whatever. And that's why you need to have control over the training data. And then, not to talk about the ethical aspects and. In exactly this, if you have a system trained on shitty data, like say on Reddit, where you could find anything, then imagine if it's trained on extreme right texts or incel conversations where everybody hates women, and then that comes up in your chatbot further down the line. So. Yeah, these are some of the things you need to consider.
Thank you very much. I think you all nailed them perfectly as well. I love the distinctions being drawn between AI and language learning models as well. I think a few people have become a bit more sensitive to that. Is it actually intelligence, or is it just a collection of words that are being put together in a nice fancy order? For me, it's transparency. It's the data sets. So, like you said, Maria, where the data is coming from. Has it got any bias built into it? What's it being trained on? And how are you training those languages? How are you training those data sets and how are you training those models? Is there full transparency to that? Do you have governance and policy around it as well? So is it something that you're just allowing people to go in freely and use and to say, it's fine, you just copy and paste it because we don't have a policy that's there to say how you can use it? Or do you have something a bit more tight-lined that says, okay, we can use an application that we built. There's a nice little interface or an overlay in there that makes it easier to remove that human error, and you keep that human brain barrier as well. I think those are really important points of making sure that you're moderating and filtering the stuff that's coming out of whatever you're putting in. Because it's not always guaranteed to be the correct response. It's not an oracle. It's going to you'll get out of it what you're putting, right? If you give it garbage, it'll give you garbage in response. If you fine-tune and tweak it, it can give you something more resilient. You still can't guarantee it's correct. You've got to do your own research. You've got to look into the response being given. There's a case of a law firm recently as well in America, and they been given some a case that they're working on, and they've gone off to do some research on it and said, ChatGPT, can you help me with this case? Here's the situation. And it came back and gave a response and said, yeah, use this, here's a case study, here's the names of the people who are involved, here's the dates. They took it to the judge, and the judge looked at it and went, it doesn't exist. It'd be completely made up, it'd been hallucinated. You can imagine the embarrassment as well, and also it was a huge fine and some punishment as well for them as well that came through from that. But yeah, plenty of risks exist in every walk. Yeah, as well. And it's that there's risks in every walk of life, and it's down to how you use it. Everything in moderation, right? And the same applies for the AI, I think.